If you believe betrayal only comes from strangers, stay with me till the end of this story and make sure to like, subscribe, and comment, because what my own parents did to me after my grandmother trusted me with everything will leave you questioning blood ties forever. My name is Ethan Miller, and I grew up in a quiet middle-class neighborhood in Ohio, where family dinners were sacred and loyalty was preached like religion. My grandmother, Margaret Miller, was the strongest woman I ever knew. She raised me when my parents were too busy chasing money and appearances. She taught me how to read, how to play piano, and how to never let anyone decide my worth. The piano was not just furniture to her, it was a priceless antique, Steinway, that had been in our family for generations. She told me clearly, years before she got sick, that the piano was mine, and only mine. It was written in her will, signed and witnessed, because she said I was the only one who loved music the way she did, while my parents and my younger sister Lily only saw it as something expensive collecting dust. When my grandmother fell seriously ill and was moved into hospice care, I was visiting her every evening after work, holding her hand while machines beeped around us. She was weak, but her mind was sharp. One night she asked me if the piano was safe, and I told her yes. It was still in the living room where it had always been. That answer broke my heart because it was a lie I did not know yet. 2 days later I came home from work and noticed the living room felt empty. The piano was gone, no marks on the floor, no explanation. When I asked my parents, they casually said they sold it, like they were talking about an old couch. I felt my chest tightened and asked why they would do that when Grandma explicitly left it to me. My mother avoided eye contact and my father said they needed money. Later I found out the truth. They sold my grandmother's antique piano for $95,000 and used every dollar to buy my sister a brand new car. Not because she needed it, but because she wanted something flashy for her college campus. When I confronted my sister, she laughed and said Grandma was practically dead anyway. That sentence echoed in my head like a gunshot. I rushed to the hospice that same night, my hands shaking as I held my grandmother's frail fingers. Tears rolled down my face as I told her the truth. I expected anger or sadness, but instead something terrifying happened. She went completely silent, then slowly reached for her phone with the little strength she had left. Her eyes locked onto mine with a calm that scared me more than rage ever could. She dialed a number from memory, put the phone on speaker, and said 5 words that changed everything. "It is time for them to meet my attorney." I did not know who she was calling, but within minutes a man in a dark suit walked into the hospice room like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. His name was Richard Hale, a high-powered estate attorney who had handled my grandmother's finances for decades. He looked at my parents the next day with a smile that did not reach his eyes. My grandmother had planned for betrayal long before it happened. She had documented everything, audio recordings, written instructions, and a legal structure that ensured consequences. What my parents did not know was that the piano was not just an inheritance item, it was the final trigger in a much larger plan. A plan designed to expose greed, punish entitlement, and make sure that loyalty was rewarded while betrayal was paid for in full. My grandmother passed away peacefully 3 days later, and at her funeral my parents cried crocodile tears while holding each other like victims. They had no idea that the real storm had not even begun yet. I stood there silent, staring at the coffin, promising her that I would finish what she started, because sometimes revenge is not loud or violent, sometimes it is quiet, calculated, and absolutely devastating. Richard Hale did not waste time because men like him understood momentum. The very next morning after the funeral, he summoned my parents and my sister to his downtown office under the excuse of reading additional personal notes from my grandmother. They arrived confident and relaxed. My mother even carried a designer handbag, bought the same week the piano was sold. They believed grief had ended the matter. They believed money erased guilt. They were wrong. I sat quietly in the corner as Richard began opening folders thicker than law textbooks. He calmly explained that my grandmother had placed most of her assets into a revocable living trust years ago after suspecting that greed would one day show its face. He then revealed that the piano had been registered as a protected cultural asset under the trust, meaning it could not legally be sold without consent from the beneficiary, which was me. My father's face drained of color when Richard slid a document across the table, showing the sale receipt, surveillance photos from the antique dealer, and a notarized copy of the will. My mother tried to interrupt, but Richard raised his hand and continued like a judge delivering a sentence. By selling the piano, they had committed financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and elder exploitation because the sale occurred while my grandmother was medically incapacitated. My sister Lily laughed nervously until Richard turned to her and explained that the car purchased with the stolen funds was now evidence, subject to seizure, lien, and criminal investigation. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. My father stood up shouting that family does not sue family, and Richard responded coldly that family also does not steal from the dying. Within a week, their bank accounts were frozen. The dealership that sold the car repossessed it from my sister while she screamed in the parking lot of her college. Local authorities opened an investigation, and the antique dealer was forced to cooperate, returning partial funds which were placed back into the trust. But my grandmother had not stopped there. She had added a clause stating that any heir who contested or violated the will would forfeit their inheritance entirely, which meant my parents lost not only the piano money, but also the house they were living in, a house that was technically owned by the trust. Eviction notices arrived quietly, but firmly. My mother begged me in private, crying and apologizing, but her tears felt rehearsed. My father avoided me completely, blaming me to relatives, spreading lies that I manipulated a sick old woman. Those lies did not survive long, because Richard released the audio recordings my grandmother had made, recordings of conversations where my parents openly discussed selling her belongings before she died, recordings of my sister calling her useless. Those files were shared during mediation and quickly leaked into extended family circles. Invitations stopped coming. Phone calls went unanswered. Isolation wrapped around them like a slow punishment. Meanwhile, I moved into my grandmother's old home, legally transferred to me inside. I found letters she had written for me years ago, explaining that real revenge was not about anger, but about balance. She wanted them to feel the weight of their choices without me ever raising my voice. Months passed and court dates followed. Charges were reduced, but consequences remained permanent. My parents were forced into debt repayment plans, their credit destroyed. My sister dropped out of college after losing financial support and moved back home, which was now a small rental apartment. I saw her once at a grocery store. She looked smaller somehow, humbled by life. She tried to speak to me, but I walked past her without a word. Not because I hated her, but because indifference was the final lesson. The piano was eventually recovered, damaged but repairable. When it was delivered back to the house, I touched the keys, and for the first time since my grandmother's death, I allowed myself to cry. Not from sadness, but from closure. I restored it slowly, honoring her memory with every note. Years later, I learned something else she had done. She had funded a music scholarship in her name, using remaining trust assets, naming me as its overseer, ensuring that music continued to change lives long after she was gone. My parents never recovered their old life, and I never helped them, not out of cruelty but because accountability matters. Betrayal has consequences, and love does not excuse greed. My grandmother taught me that justice does not need fists or fire. It needs patience, truth, and perfect timing. And every time I sit at that piano and let the room fill with sound, I remember the calm in her eyes when she made that call. Because that was the moment everything shifted. And the moment I learned that the most devastating revenge is simply letting people face exactly what they chose. What I did not understand at the time was that consequences do not end when the court papers stop coming. They evolve. They follow people quietly into their daily routines and slowly strip away the illusions they once lived in. A year after everything collapsed, I started receiving messages from extended relatives who had finally pieced together the full truth. Cousins who admitted they had believed my parents' lies at first, but later heard the recordings and saw the documents. Some apologized, some stayed silent out of shame. But what mattered was that the narrative had changed permanently. My parents were no longer victims in anyone's eyes. They were examples, warnings whispered during family gatherings about what greed does when it goes unchecked. My father lost his job after a background check flagged the financial investigation tied to elder exploitation. No criminal conviction was needed for corporate trust to disappear. My mother tried to start a small online business, but could not secure loans or suppliers because her credit was destroyed, and Lily bounced between temporary jobs, never staying long enough to feel stable. Resentment began eating them from the inside, not toward themselves but toward me, because accountability always feels like betrayal to those who refuse responsibility. I heard through mutual contacts that my father blamed me for ruining his life, claiming I manipulated legal loopholes, that I poisoned my grandmother against them. But what haunted him most was that he could never say those words to my face, because every time we crossed paths he saw not anger or pride in my expression but calm, the kind of calm that reflects truth. Meanwhile, my life moved forward in ways I never expected. The house became a place of quiet healing. I kept my grandmother's room untouched for a long time, sitting there late at night reading her old journals, learning about sacrifices she made that no one thanked her for. choices she regretted, and plans she carefully laid for the future, even while her body was failing. One entry stood out where she wrote that people reveal their real selves when they believe no one is watching, and that the piano was never the real test, it was the excuse she suspected my parents. Long before they acted, she simply waited for certainty that knowledge reshaped how I viewed everything. I stopped questioning whether I had done the right thing, because it was never my revenge, it was her final lesson. 2 years later, the scholarship began changing lives. Young musicians from low-income backgrounds sent letters thanking me for the opportunity, sharing videos of their first recitals, their first compositions. Every letter felt like proof that something beautiful can rise from betrayal. Ironically, my sister Lily applied for financial aid to return to school and was rejected because of her past academic withdrawal and unpaid debts. I never interfered, not to help and not to harm, because growth cannot be forced, it must be earned. One evening she showed up at my door unannounced, thinner, quieter, stripped of the entitlement she once wore like perfume. She did not apologize right away. Instead, she stood there crying, saying she never thought it would end like this, that she believed money would always be there, that family would always fix things. I listened without interrupting, because silence is sometimes more powerful than confrontation. When she finally apologized, it felt real, not desperate. But acceptance does not erase consequences. I told her forgiveness does not mean reversal, that some bridges burn so completely they become lessons instead of paths. She nodded, understanding for the first time that adulthood does not come with resets. After she left, I felt lighter, not relieved, but resolved. My parents never came together again as they once were. Stress fractured their marriage. Arguments turned into separation, and separation turned into quiet loneliness. Neighbors moved on, friends disappeared, and they aged faster than time alone would explain. The weight of their choices pressed down daily, while I built a future rooted in purpose instead of resentment. I started teaching piano locally, passing on the same discipline and love my grandmother gave me. Every student knew the story in fragments, not as gossip but as guidance, a reminder that integrity matters even when no one is watching. Sometimes, especially then. Years later, when I was invited to speak at a legal ethics seminar about estate planning and elder protection, I realized the ripple effect had grown far beyond our family. Professionals cited my grandmother's trust structure as a model. Lawmakers referenced similar cases when pushing for stronger protections. Her quiet planning outlived her physical presence, and that was her true legacy. Not the piano, not the money, but the reminder that preparation is power. The last time I saw my parents was at a hospital hallway when my father was being treated for stress-related complications. He looked at me with eyes full of regret and pride mixed together. He tried to speak but stopped himself, perhaps realizing that words cannot undo actions. I wished him well, sincerely, and walked away without bitterness, because justice had already been served in the most human way possible, not through hatred but through truth, patience, and time. And as I stepped back into the sunlight, I understood something profound. Revenge does not always scream, sometimes it whispers through years of consequence, shaping lives according to the choices made long ago. And when people finally understand that they are living inside the outcome of their own decisions, that realization is heavier than any punishment could ever be. That understanding stayed with me as the years kept moving forward, because life does not freeze after justice is delivered. It keeps testing whether you truly learned the lesson or just survived the moment. 3 years after everything fell apart, I received a letter addressed in my grandmother's handwriting, something I thought impossible. But inside I realized she had written it long before her death and instructed Richard to mail it to me only when enough time had passed. That letter was not emotional, it was practical. She reminded me that power without wisdom becomes cruelty, and that revenge without restraint turns the innocent into the guilty. She told me she never wanted me to hate my parents. She wanted me to see them clearly, as flawed humans who chose comfort over character. And she warned me that one day they might try to come back, not out of love but out of need. And when that moment came, my response would define who I truly became. That warning proved prophetic, because not long after that letter arrived, my mother reached out through a mutual acquaintance asking for a meeting. She was living alone. By then her marriage dissolved, her social circle gone, and illness had begun creeping into her body, the way regret creeps into the mind. We met at a small diner on the edge of town. She looked older than her years, her hands trembled as she held her coffee. She spoke slowly, choosing words carefully, saying she finally understood what she had done. That selling the piano was not about money, but about control. About proving she still mattered. She admitted she resented my grandmother's strength and my bond with her. Hearing that truth did not hurt the way lies once did. It simply confirmed what time had already shown me. She asked if I could help her financially. Not much, she said, just enough to stabilize. The room went quiet. This was the moment my grandmother predicted. I did not feel anger or triumph. I felt clarity. I told her no. Not harshly, not kindly, just honestly. I explained that helping her now would erase the lesson that shaped all of us, that consequences lose meaning when they are softened by the very people they were meant to teach. She cried quietly, not begging, just accepting, and for the first time I saw real accountability in her eyes. When we parted, she thanked me not for refusing, but for listening, and I knew that was the most I could give without betraying myself. My father's situation unfolded differently. His health declined faster, stress hollowed him out, and one afternoon, I received a call that he had been admitted to hospice care, the same place where my grandmother's last days were spent. Walking those halls again felt like stepping into a memory loop, but this time I was not a helpless observer. He was weak, smaller, stripped of authority. When he saw me, he smiled faintly and said he never believed consequences would follow him this far. He admitted he thought intelligence meant escaping outcomes. He was wrong. He did not ask for forgiveness, only understanding, and I gave him that. Because understanding does not require approval. Before I left, he said something that stayed with me. He said, losing everything forced him to finally meet himself, and he did not like what he found. He passed away weeks later, quietly, without drama, and I felt sadness, not because justice failed, but because it succeeded too late for redemption. My sister Lily's life took a different turn as well. Hardship reshaped her. Years of instability stripped away entitlement and replaced it with humility. She worked service jobs, struggled, failed, and learned. Eventually she reached out again, not for money, but for advice. She asked how I kept moving forward without bitterness. I told her the truth, that bitterness is heavy, and I refused to carry what others created. That accountability frees the victim as much as it corrects the guilty. She listened, really listened. And over time we rebuilt a cautious connection. Not siblings bound by childhood nostalgia, but adults bound by honesty. She never asked for the car back, never asked for the money. She accepted her role fully, and that acceptance was the beginning of her growth. She enrolled in community college years later on her own savings, proving that change is possible when excuses end. Meanwhile, the piano became more than an instrument. It became a symbol. I held small gatherings where music filled the house again, where laughter replaced tension, where my grandmother's presence felt alive in every chord. The scholarship expanded, touching dozens of lives, each success story reinforcing the truth that legacy is built through intention, not inheritance. People sometimes asked me if I felt satisfied with how everything ended, if the revenge was worth it, and I always gave the same answer. There was no revenge, only consequence. Revenge seeks pain, consequence seeks balance. What happened was inevitable once choices were made. All I did was refuse to interfere. Looking back now, I understand that the most devastating part was not the loss of money, status, or comfort. It was the slow realization that no one else was to blame, that the mirror finally spoke. My grandmother understood that humans fear self-accountability more than punishment, and she built a system that forced reflection instead of escape. Her final gift to me was not protection but perspective, teaching me that strength is quiet, justice is patient, and love does not mean shielding people from the results of their actions. As I sit here now, years later, hands resting on the same piano keys she once touched, I know that story did not end with a lawsuit or a repossessed car. It ended with transformation, fractured lives reshaped by truth, and a reminder that when people choose greed over integrity, the most powerful response is to step aside and let life deliver exactly what they ordered. That philosophy became the foundation of everything that followed, because once you truly understand that life itself is the most precise judge, you stop chasing closure and start living with purpose. Years passed quietly, not without challenges, but without chaos, and that difference mattered. The house no longer felt like a battlefield of memories, but like a living space that evolved with time. I renovated parts of it carefully, preserving the essence my grandmother loved while allowing myself to grow beyond grief. The piano remained the heart of the home, restored fully now, its sound richer than ever, and every time I played it felt like a conversation across generations. My career shifted naturally toward advocacy and education. I began working with legal organizations that focused on elder protection, sharing my grandmother's story anonymously at first, then openly, because silence protects the wrong people. I watched as families avoided similar betrayals simply by planning ahead. by asking hard questions early, by refusing to assume that blood automatically equals loyalty. The ripple effect continued in ways I never predicted. One of the scholarship recipients went on to perform at a national level and dedicated his first major performance to my grandmother's name, sitting in that audience, listening to music born from resilience rather than greed. I finally felt the full weight of what she had accomplished, not just correcting injustice, but creating opportunity. My relationship with Lily stabilized into something honest, not close but respectful. We spoke occasionally, shared updates, acknowledged the past without trying to rewrite it. She carried her accountability quietly, never asking for sympathy. And that discipline earned my respect more than any apology ever could. My mother's health declined over time. She never asked me for help again, but I made sure she was not abandoned. I arranged care options through neutral channels, ensuring dignity without dependency, because compassion does not require sacrifice of principle. When she passed away, I attended the funeral quietly, not as a son seeking reconciliation, but as a human honoring a complicated life. There were no dramatic moments, no speeches, just acceptance, and that was enough. Standing there, I realized something important. Closure is not a moment, it is a process, one that unfolds when you stop resisting reality. People often ask if I regret not intervening earlier, if things could have been softened, if damage could have been reduced, but that question misunderstands the lesson entirely. Interference would have delayed growth, protection would have preserved illusion. And illusion is where corruption thrives. My grandmother understood that better than anyone. She did not destroy her family, she revealed it. She allowed truth to surface without force, and truth changed us all in different ways. Some broke under it, some bent, some rebuilt, but no one remained the same, and that is the mark of real justice. Now when I teach my students or speak publicly, I emphasize one idea above all else: integrity is what you choose when you believe consequences are far away, because they are never as far as you think. Every choice leaves a fingerprint on the future, and time has a way of collecting evidence. Patiently, my life today is not defined by revenge or loss, it is defined by alignment. My values match my actions match my outcomes, and that harmony brings a peace no amount of money ever could. Sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet and the piano keys are cool under my fingers, I think about that moment in the hospice room when my grandmother made that call, not with anger, not with fear, but with certainty. She trusted the system she built, and more importantly, she trusted me to respect it. That trust shaped the man I became. If there is one truth this story leaves behind, it is this: you do not need to punish those who wrong you, you only need to stop protecting them from the results of their own decisions. Because when people finally stand face to face with the lives they constructed through greed, entitlement, or neglect, that confrontation is heavier than any sentence a court could impose. And when you step aside with clarity instead of hatred, life delivers exactly what was ordered, no more and no less. And that balance is the most devastating and the most peaceful.